Welcome to the North Park Podcast, where pastors and people connect. This is the place to get to know your pastors as they address theology, ministry, and more. Join us now for today's conversation.
Hello and welcome to the North Park Podcast. My name is Luke Kiergaard, and today I am joined by Pastor Luke Johnson. How's it going, Luke?
Hey, doing fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm
Luke?
doing good. I'm excited about today's topic.
Yeah, me too.
Really
excited.
Yeah, but Pastor Zach is not here. So where is Zach?
Yeah, we miss him. We're man down, though we are excited about the conversation. We feel his absence even as we try to do all the technological stuff without him. But Zach is currently down at a worship leader conference in Nashville called the Sing Conference that is led by Keith and Kristen Getty. So some really great names to be learning about worship and leading worship. And so we're excited for him and the ways that he's growing and hopefully enjoying that time down there.
Yeah, definitely. One of my favorite things about some of the conferences that I've been to is free books.
Ooh.
So I don't know if they do that at the Sing Conference, but
I bet they do.
I guess we'll find out. But today we're actually going to be talking about books. And now before some of you click off of this episode because you're not a reader, we just want to encourage you to stick with us for at least a little bit, because we're going to start this discussion by asking why Christians should be readers in the first place. So if you would just hear out our argument, and if you totally disagree with us, then feel free to skip this episode. But we believe there is a compelling argument to be made for why Christians should be a reading people. And for those of you who love books like we do, then I'm sure you'll enjoy this. And after we talk a bit about why reading is so important, we will get into some of our favorite books and kind of nerd out a little bit and possibly make some recommendations for our listeners.
Yeah, I think so. Luke, let me say, masterful transition there from conference to free book giveaways to this episode. And you're really developing quite nicely here as our host.
Thanks. So, Pastor Luke, why should Christians be readers?
Yeah, so I guess I could summarize it up into maybe 6 quick points, and then we'll hear if you have anything to add on to this. So as I just maybe jotted down some initial reasons why it's important for us to be a reading people. Number one, I would say to be Bereans. We are to test what people say about the Scriptures according to the Scriptures themselves. And so we need to know the Scriptures, but we also need to understand the Scriptures not just from our individual reading of the Scriptures, but through our reading of the Scriptures in the context of church history and other great theologians and men and women who have devoted themselves to understanding Greek and Hebrew and good hermeneutics and how to study the Bible and stuff like that. And so, I've spent a lot of time in school learning stuff, but I still go to commentaries every time I preach, and I'm always consulting 4, 5, 6 commentaries. And so that's non-biblical literature that is helping me to think better about the text that I'm reading. So it's just, I think, a helpful thing for us in that regard. And that kind of goes along with number 2, which is to test prophecies, which is a command given in Paul's letters. And so for us to rightly test the things that are said and taught by other pastors and whatnot, we need to be able to take what we hear and run it through a filter, a lens of just various reputable, credentialed thoughts on stuff. Number 3, I would say, is to know the times, and that's a little bit of a reference from 1 Chronicles 12:32. It says that the men of Issachar were those who knew and who had an understanding of the times, and so these men seem to be commended for their ability to understand their context, their cultural context, and just their situation in the world at that time. And I think that's helpful for us, whether that looks like reading the news or reading common literature or things like that. We better understand the world in which we're situated in as 21st century Americans when we read widely. Going along with that, kind of similarly, not only do we need to know the times, but number 4, we need to be able to speak into the times, to speak to our culture. And so that's not just for me as a preacher, but that's for everybody who is about the business of the kingdom, is to engage with the culture, because the culture is, in one sense, yes, the world we live in, but in another sense, we recognize that the world apart from Christ is what's referred to as the fallen world system. And so it is going to have a skewed, maligned, distorted, deformed understanding of the world. And for us to engage with that, we need to hear the voices that are espousing some of that ideology. And we see Paul set the example for this on more than one occasion in Acts and in some of Paul's letters. He actually quotes non-Christian Greek philosophers. And so he was obviously reading non-Christian Greek philosophers in order to quote them to make the theological point that he wanted to make. And so I think in the same way, we engage better with the culture when we really understand the culture, because we've engaged with it, with the literature of it. Number 5, and this is where I like to make a nice little pivot, and I think this is where you and I are going here, Luke, to appreciate beauty and to enjoy it. Beauty is something that God embedded into creation, and he gave us as humans the faculty of seeing, valuing, and appreciating beauty. This is called axiology, and we're to find joy in these things, and not only to enjoy it, but we're also to be creators of it, and to create beautiful things. And so to create a beautiful piece of literature, whether that's poetry or narrative, a story, it is something within us and our image-bearing qualities to create it and then to enjoy it when others create it well. And I think that that's an important thing for us to do, to enjoy God's creation. And then number 6, finally, to remember the truest realities of the world. I think sometimes we can become so distracted at the day-to-day routine, monotony, kind of surface level encounters that we have. But I'm going to give a little quote to the man, C.S. Lewis here, a great creator of good literature in a variety of different genres. And he said this: "Since it is so likely that children will meet cruel enemies, let them at least have heard of brave knights and heroic courage." I love that. I find that good books are one of the best tools for me to cultivate the virtues in my sons that I want them to have and to be able to display and to live out in this world, especially as they grow. And they need certain visions of that good literature can really magnify in a unique way. And because this world has a lot of cruel enemies, and primarily in the spiritual realm, and those are easy to forget about. And so I think good literature and being a good reader will help to cultivate good qualities within you and good virtues within you. So I just talked more than I should have, Luke, but we feel passionate about this topic. And so let me hear, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, the one thing I was going to say in the time prepping for this episode, knowing this topic was coming up, I saw a recent episode of Ask Pastor John Piper's short podcast that he does I think it was titled, "Why Does John Piper Read Books?" Basically answering the question we're asking right now. And just one point he made that was just so simple and makes so much sense is that God chose for his revelation to us to be through a book.
Yeah.
So that itself says a lot about books. And but yeah, those are great reasons. And so let's say someone heard you out there and they agree with everything you say, but they're thinking, well, I'm not a good reader, or I'm just not a reader, or I'm not smart enough. What do we say to those people?
So I have a couple different thoughts. And I love that you just quoted John Piper, because he has written a lot of books and he has read a lot of books. But interestingly about John Piper, I heard him on an interview talking about his reading. I don't know if it's the same one. I think it was Kevin DeYoung's podcast where he was interviewed on it. He said, he talked about how he's actually a slow reader. John Piper's not a quick reader, and he has struggled, I think, potentially, don't quote me on this, but I thought he said, I recall him saying that he even struggled with dyslexia earlier on. And so he said, one of the results of that is that being a slower reader has made him a careful and a thoughtful reader. And I think that that's where I would want to lead off with in answering your question. If you feel like because you're not able to read a book a week or whatever, or it just takes a long time to get through a couple pages, that's not necessarily a bad thing. That might mean that you can be a slower, careful, thoughtful reader, and that's okay. And so maybe just taking the pressure off of how many books you can read in a year, so that at the end of the year you can like take a picture of this stack of 30 books and put it on Instagram or something like that. Maybe just cultivate a love of the process and an enjoyment in engaging with it. And if it's slow, it's slow. That's okay. That's not a problem at all. But then I'd also maybe say this is, so I was a pretty slow reader for a while because I'd never practiced with it. And I ended up taking a speed reading class to finish up my bachelor's, which was actually like really helpful given my job as a pastor. But one of the things that they pointed out is if you don't practice reading, then your eyes will not, your eyes and your mind won't be trained to read words quickly. And if you don't read quickly enough, then your mind will become very easily distracted, because I can speak pretty quickly and your brain can receive it like pretty quickly. And so it's not a content, how much information your brain can take in. About as fast as your eyes can read the words, your brain can receive it. You just kind of maybe have to practice and train a little bit. And if you read too slowly, maybe some of our listeners can relate to this. I know that like when I'm tired, I struggle with this a lot, where I'll read half a page and say, what in the world did I just read?
Yeah.
And what it was is that I was tired, my eyes were moving slowly, and so even though I was reading the page, so to speak, my mind was totally distracted. And this is even more so an issue with just the media world we live in, where like Instagram and social media apps and even the way YouTube videos work, oftentimes it's images and they're quick changing images. And so because of that, we are losing the ability to stay focused and concentrated for an elongated period of time. And so I think honestly we just need to practice resisting that. That's a discipline thing. I know that I feel it. I struggle sometimes keeping up my reading ability because I just feel that tension happening within my own mind. And the last thing I'd say is this: I like reading a book when I want to really engage with a piece of literature, whatever it may be. Then reading it is good, but I also really love audiobooks, and an audiobook is totally fine. Remember the Bible, yes, it was written down and was a book. It was developed to be a book, but for the very early recipients, oftentimes they received it by it being read to them, because literacy rates were really low, and even accessibility to different parchments and whatnot. And you just kind of maybe had to have someone read it to you. And so we see that with Ezra as he read the book of the law to the people. We see that with Paul's letters where it would have been read to the congregation. And so receiving books audibly is totally good and fine. And sometimes if you have a really busy schedule, that can be a helpful way to take in content while you're mowing the lawn or driving on a commute or things like that. And so audiobooks are a good thing. And we have just an amazing access to so much literature through audiobooks. So those are some, maybe thoughts that I would just kind of throw out there is, if you feel like you're not a good reader, that's okay. Everything takes practice, doesn't it? I mean, I'm trying to get back into the gym, and that's taken a little bit of practice, and it doesn't always come easily. And sometimes it's a little bit of hard work, but I think, what I hope is that people say that the rewards on the other end of making this a regular practice in your life are very much worth it.
Let's talk about some of our favorite books. I wrote our all-time favorite books. I guess that's kind of an intimidating way to put it, because it's hard to choose sometimes.
It is, really
and it's
hard.
An ever-changing list for me, at least.
How many do you have written down, or how many did you come prepared to talk about?
I just came with 2 because I knew you'd
God
have
bless you.
10.
Like I said, you're becoming a great host. You know who you're talking to. So I kind of broke mine down to fiction and nonfiction. And then under nonfiction, I kind of broke it down to biographical, non-biographical, and a bonus. So, are all of yours fiction or nonfiction, or do you have a blend?
I have one fiction, one nonfiction.
Okay, let's start with fiction. What was your fiction choice?
Okay, I'm sure this is on your list. Lord of the Rings.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Lord of the Rings. Growing up, I've always loved the movies. I've always told myself I need to read the books, and it was pretty recently, actually, like within the last few years, I finally did. I had read The Hobbit a while ago, which is kind of considered a children's book almost.
I love it, though.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just love the world that Tolkien created. I don't think I really need to explain what it is. Probably most people have heard of Lord of the Rings, but it's long. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of other books that give like history to the world.
Yeah.
But even just a good fantasy book with maps and appendices, and there's like a subject index in the back. It's like, I know this is something that I'll be reading probably for the rest of my life. And then on top of all that, of course, there's these awesome good versus evil themes. I think Tolkien was Catholic, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But he was a very good close friend of C.S. Lewis, and both of those authors and their fiction works really wove their faith and just a lot of biblical themes into the writing. And so it's kind of a generic favorite fiction book for people in ministry, but it's so rich.
It really is. It really is. It is so profound. And I think so it's on my list as well. I think it's so profound because he doesn't force the Christian-y thing in there that kind of cheapens it at times. He actually critiqued C.S. Lewis, saying that he made Aslan too easy. And so for Tolkien, he said that Lord of the Rings was not intended to be an allegory, but his faith is undeniably embedded into his themes, the virtues, the redemptive journey that is transpiring there. And so, yeah, I agree with you. The Lord of the Rings and the whole anthology of Middle-earth, really. I've read Silmarillion. I've read The Lost Tales. I've started The Fall of Gondolin. And I actually am working on the appendices, because it dawned on me I'd never read the appendices, and I was like, I need to go back and read those, because there's a ton in the appendices. So, plus his books come with a map, which is really cool. That's a really unique thing, and I love that. A couple others under the fiction is me and my boys are reading through the Wingfeather Saga by Andrew Peterson, where we finished book 3 and it's a 4-book volume, and it is incredible. It's again one of those things where if you know your Bible really well, you see so many subtle allusions and thematic overtones between them. It's really, really well done. I think that one is written more at a kid level, but I am eating it up. Probably more so than my boys, honestly. Another one, this was actually recommended maybe 12 years or so ago from a blog by Kevin DeYoung, and it's The Book of the Dun Cow by Walter Wangerin Jr. And it's just really fascinating. You got a lot of those, kind of Christ type motifs in there from the unusual, the person you wouldn't expect, kind of thing. But good self-sacrificial, out of love kind of themes there. This is another one that I find really insightful given the days that we live. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. I read that book and I'm like, man, he was on to something, because he was writing in like the 20s. And the degree to which that book seems almost prophetically relevant to us is incredibly fascinating. And the last one here under my fiction is the Father Brown series by G.K. Chesterton. So that's Chesterton's just one of the wittiest guys out there, and his Father Brown series was supposed to be kind of like a Sherlock Holmes kind of detective books, but he took the angle of making him a priest, just kind of this lowly, kind of dumpy priest that people never took seriously, but as a priest, he knew the human condition really well. He was really good at observing things, of course, because you have to be as a detective. But he was also really insightful into the human condition. And I think that's really profound to see how G.K. Chesterton unfolds these crime narratives by looking into like the human psyche and from kind of a spiritual angle. So that's a really fascinating collection as well. Short stories, so pretty easy to read and palatable. So, all right.
That's good. So that's just fiction.
So what do you got on your nonfiction?
Yeah, so I kind of tried to do one old, one new, one fiction, one nonfiction. So my nonfiction is the new book, which came out in 2018, I believe. It's called The Storm-Tossed Family, How the Cross Reshapes the Home by Russell Moore. And just a real blessing of a book to me. I just really enjoyed it. Basically, he's saying every family is a storm-tossed family to some degree because we're all fallen, sinful people. And so he kind of takes different angles on marriage and parenting and being single and extended family and stuff. So it's not necessarily for like a family with kids. I think any Christian could read this book. And he just talks about how the gospel can redeem every part of family life. And it's just really well written. I'm actually going to be rereading this soon and really looking forward to it. But I'll read this sentence from the back. It says, "The only safe harbor for a storm-tossed family is a nail-scarred home."
That'll preach.
Yeah, that's a good line right there. So yeah, I just really love this book. And I've read a couple other things from Russell Moore. He's not necessarily a favorite author of mine, but just something about this one. It's really well written, and yeah, I just really enjoy it. The Storm-Tossed Family by Russell Moore.
Nice. Well, let me hang with the non-biographical, and then maybe I'll just wrap up with some of my favorite biographical stuff. So, staying in your vein of non-biographical, right there. So this is one that was like incredibly pivotal to my life as a newer believer. So I think more than anything, it hit me at that right time as I was trying to like really understand like the depths of the gospel. And so that's why it's on my all-time favorites, because of how formational it was so early on in my early life as a believer. And that's The Tale of Two Sons by John MacArthur. And the way that he walked through the gospel by expounding that passage of the prodigal son in Luke 15 was genuinely transformational in my life and understanding. And so so love that book because of that. Hugely impactful. So that's what I got. You got one more?
Nope, I'm done.
Okay. All right.
These are for a different question.
Gotcha. Okay. So then my other non-biographical, Michael Heiser, The Unseen Realm. That book is readable, but it is dense with footnotes. And I read all those footnotes and that whole thing, and it was an incredibly provocative take on the supernatural realm. Incredibly biblical, but he develops a lot of his thoughts based on some of those kind of more weird, obscure verses in the Bible that we kind of gloss over. And he says, no, we shouldn't just gloss over them. We need to use them to understand the supernatural realm in a better way. So that's like, if you need your theology to be, stirred afresh, engage with that one. Really good. Another one, The Intentional Father by John Tyson. I read that book when I was in quarantine for COVID. And so I was just like sitting in my room reading that book. And this is just a conversation between you and I, Luke. So, not for anybody else that may be listening, but I started weeping. I'm kidding. You keep that part in. No, I was just weeping in there because I was so like, just feeling the weight of being a father and seeing the beauty of what fatherhood can be and the result of what it can be, and just feeling compelled. And it was just a really beautiful read as I just consider raising my two boys. And then another fun one was, now I'll skip that one because that one's not worth being on the all-time favorite list. All right, biographical ones, though. This is one that just kind of like soothed my soul, because I tend to be people are probably getting this from like listening to how much I'm talking right now. I tend to be a pretty fast-paced guy, and I tend to not sit still too well when I'm here. When I'm at home, I can sit still real well. But when I'm here working, I tend to just want to get going on stuff. And so this one just kind of soothed my soul a little bit. It's called Becoming Dallas Willard. And so it's just a biography of Dallas Willard. But he was such a slow, thoughtful guy that I don't know. There's something beautiful in the way he could just live rested and slow and be so meaningful in that way. And so it's just one that's almost kind of cathartic for me to read. Another one that's certainly an all-time top is the Hiding Place, the biography of Corrie ten Boom, and how her family sought to help out Jews during World War II. Another one that I've read really recently that I absolutely love and highly commend. Those first two, Hiding Place you should read, but Rembrandt is in the Wind by Russ Ramsey here. And it's Learning to Love Art Through the Eyes of Faith is the subtitle. And he does such an excellent job giving a brief biography of a series of different painters, but then showing what we learn about faith and the Christian life and things like that by seeing their stories and the way that they painted because of their stories, and is really, really profoundly done. All right, my all-time favorite, though, in the biographical sphere, Spurgeon's autobiography. I'm kind of a Spurgeon fanboy. Piper, since we're quoting Piper left and right, he said early on, he said, you should learn all of church history. You should be familiar with all of church history, but you should cling to one individual and learn him inside and out. And I was just like, all right, yeah. And I just kept seeing all these Spurgeon quotes, and so I clung to Spurgeon. And I love his autobiography. He's got a certain tenacity in him that I like, but he's also still so overwhelmingly gracious and gospel-centered and all of that. So that's it. Those are some of my all-time favorites, and I've got two bonuses that are one a favorite poet and one a favorite series. All right, okay. If I can, and then we're gonna move on. All right, my favorite poet is Malcolm Guite. Malcolm Guite, Guite. If you look up his Quarantine Quatrains, they're so good. Quarantine Quatrains. Yeah, and you can listen to him read it, which is really good because he's very good at reading his own poetry, so you catch the cadence and the meter of it. But it's poetry that he wrote during like the big shutdown and when everyone was in quarantine, and it's really, really good. And then one of my favorite series from a theology standpoint is Counterpoint series, where different guys write on theology from different stances, and you get to kind of see how they would articulate their position themselves. And so that's just a little bonus feature there.
So another question, what is one book you have read this year, one you are currently reading, and one you would like to read soon? You want me to go first?
Yeah, you go first and share the book you read, and then I'll share the book I read.
So one that I read earlier this year is called Finding the Right Hills to Die On, The Case for Theological Triage. And it's by Gavin Ortlund. You might recognize that last name. Dane Ortlund, his brother, wrote Gentle and Lowly, which was just a huge and really good book from a couple years ago. So this is his brother. Anyways, this book is, I'll just read a little blurb from the back because it'll put it more succinctly than I would say. Just as a medic on a battlefield treats the severely wounded first and then moves on to the less serious injuries, we must prioritize doctrine in order of importance. So he takes this term theological triage, which I think was coined by Albert Mohler, I'm pretty sure. basically taking this idea of triage in the medical field, but putting that idea onto doctrine. And that's the title, Finding the Right Hills to Die On, meaning what do we need to, I guess, make more of a fuss over than other things.
Yeah.
I just really enjoyed it because it is an important topic, but also he shares some of his story and kind of his years where he's trying to find his place in the church as far as not really feeling like he fits in with any certain denominations as he, looks at his own doctrinal standpoints. And it's just really good. It's a short read. It's like 150 pages. I wouldn't say like the average Christian in general would be super interested in it, but it's worth checking out.
Yeah, that's good. Good book there. One that I've read, well, I did read Rembrandt is in the Wind, but I already put that on one of my all-times, and I think it's going to stand there. I really liked it. And so I'll go with a different one for one of the books I've read in this last year that I've really, really enjoyed, and that was Tim Keller's biography done by Colin Hansen. I just really valued Tim Keller's ministry, his longevity, and the way he finished. And when a good pastor finishes well, I really like to honor that, and so it was just kind of a sweet read to see his life over the years, and it culminated in such a wonderful gospel fruit. So Tim Keller's biography. If you get the audiobook, which is what I did for that one, you get 7 of his sermons included at the end. So some of his top listened to sermons, which was really cool.
Cool. Book I'm reading right now, I'm slowly working through Dune by Frank Herbert.
Getting ready for that second movie?
Yes. So this is a big book. It's like over 600 pages, but it's like one of the all-time best science fiction works, and I'm really enjoying it. My wife and I saw the movie that came out, was that last year or 2 years ago now?
Goodness, no,
I think a little while.
Maybe a year ago summer.
Yeah.
This last summer.
Not too long ago, and really loved it. And I've always heard of Dune, but I think maybe its size was a little intimidating, and it's also older. I think was written in the 60s. So I don't know. I guess I just had those as excuses not to pick it up. But I loved the story after seeing the movie. And so I was trying to plow through this before Part 2 came out, which was supposed to be later this year, but I think because of the writer's strike or something, it's been pushed back.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, to like early next year. So I was disappointed to hear that because I was excited for the movie, but now I have more time to read this big book before it comes out. So
yeah,
it's kind of a bittersweet thing.
Nice. Good. So far, is the book better than the movie, or are they comparable?
I don't think I've read enough of it yet to say that.
Verdict is still out.
Yeah. But I'm really enjoying the book so far.
Book that I'm currently reading. This is a fun one. The Baptist Story, from English Sect to Global Movement. So this is, there's different categories on why you read what you read. Some of it is for joy. Some of it is just for intrigue and curiosity. And some is you just got to stay up. You just got to keep up to snuff on certain things. And church history is one that, I've got familiarity with this, but we are making decisions, here at North Park. And, we always, I think it's just helpful to keep on my mind why we do some of the things we do, where it kind of originated in church history, how it kind of developed at that time and got maybe carried on as tradition. But I think it's just helpful to have just a little bit of the historical context on certain things that we do in the church, and so that we can, rightly assess, is this something that we should keep doing, or is it something that's okay to let go? And so just reading a little history of the Baptist denomination.
Cool.
Yeah.
One book I'm wanting to read in the near future, and of course I can't say too much about it because I haven't read it yet, but Humility by Andrew Murray. Have you read that before?
Yes, I have, yeah.
Kind of a Christian classic.
Yeah, for sure.
I believe he was a South African pastor and writer. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of those books, if you look up top 50 Christian books of all time, you might find that on there. So planning to read that sometime soon.
So the book that I am wanting to read soon, and hopefully it will be delivered on my doorstep later today.
Oh.
Yeah. is I mentioned this to you, Luke. I caught wind of it from a podcast I was listening to where this professor from Northwestern University, his name is Gary Saul Morson. He's an expert on 19th, 20th century Russian literature. And he wrote a book recently called Wonder Confronts Certainty, Russian Writers on the Timeless Questions and Why Their Answers Matter. And so essentially he's looking at guys like Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and just some of those like just classic Russian writers who wrote so uniquely to some of the deepest aches of the human heart and responses to it that and he kind of talks about in his podcast, which I presume he elaborates on in his book, is kind of how just some of the horrors of like Russia then, with some of the atrocities that happened with killing their people and suffering in gulags and things like that, and that some of that forced these writers to contemplate suffering and just like existence of the world at like a deeper level, given the things that they were being subjected to. And because of that, they produced some of these stories and literature that address some of these deepest questions and aches from a really profound way. And so I agree with you. I can't say too much about it because I haven't read it yet, but I am really excited to plunge into that one because good sermons should do something similar to that.
That's good. Also, let me say, we will have all the books mentioned in this video in the show notes.
Ooh.
So,
oh boy.
So you can just look at those instead of trying to
and click the link
scroll.
to Amazon to purchase it.
Yeah, and we'll get a share of that. Just kidding. Affiliate link. But anyways, to close, let's say we've convinced the listener to pick up a book again, or perhaps try to get into reading for the first time. And we gave some tips and ideas kind of towards the beginning of this, but what are some good ideas you would share with them, or maybe even book recommendations to start?
Yeah, so a couple of things, and one I already mentioned, and that's, don't finish a book that's not worth finishing. Maybe it was good for the first third, but you've just like stalled out, and you just cannot bring yourself to get back and finish it. You know what? Just set it off to the side. It's okay. And move on to something else. And so that would be one recommendation. Another recommendation is shake it up and have fun. For a long time, I didn't read fiction. I had this real big gap where I just felt like I always had another like theology or ministry book to read. And when I was in school, I certainly did have very little margin for reading fiction or fun things or poetry or stuff like that. But now I'm done with schooling for sure. Like, there's just a lot of delight in picking up Lord of the Rings or Malcolm Geit's, collection of poetry or something like that. And so enjoy the process as much as you can by reading some different genres. And your thing might not be my thing. Maybe it's not Lord of the Rings. Maybe it is more the sci-fi stuff with Dune or whatever, or maybe poetry is something you really cling to. Whatever's your thing. Get back into the practice of reading regularly and the discipline of reading regularly by just by choosing some easy reads or some fun reads, some things that you can maybe accomplish and say, there's a book checked off that I wanted to, and so yeah, all good things are worth working hard for, and again, if you're convinced by the end of this that like you want a richer reading life, then is going to be a little bit of maybe upfront work to kind of create that time, create that margin, things like that. And so yeah, I think those are some of the recommendations I'd put off the top of my head, and then maybe turn off Netflix for an evening and read a book instead every now and then.
Yeah, so, the excuse of I don't have time to read is...
I won't tolerate it.
Yeah. I would say... Mortimer Adler, I think is his name, has a book called How to Read a Book. Yeah. And one of his main points is that you don't read every book the same. Some books, and especially if it comes to nonfiction, I would say. Mm-hmm. And as a Christian, if you have a rich reading life, I think that'll include a lot of nonfiction. And not all books for you are meant to be read every single word. Some of them are meant to be read faster. Some you need to sit with for like a couple years maybe. And some are you can just benefit a lot from just kind of skimming through them. So you don't have to approach every book the same way.
Yeah, it's a good word.
Also, I would clarify that we don't expect anyone to be excited about every book that we mentioned in this episode.
No.
And I think Pastor Luke and I have very similar tastes, so we get a little more excited talking about it. But
with that, let me just also say this as well, that like it's a sweet part of my job. I've got hard parts in my job, but I've got good parts in my job. And one of the good, great, awesome parts of my job is that like reading is a part of my job. Reading commentaries, reading books, things like that, staying up to date on certain pieces of literature is a part of my job. And so, I rattled off a ton of books, but like recognize I'm not doing 50 hours in a factory or whatever. And so, that's, so don't put expectations that are unrealistic. Carve out time here or there as you're able. And again, maybe that's the commute with an audiobook. Maybe that's, a Saturday morning for an hour at a coffee shop or something like that. Just be reasonable with yourself. It's totally fine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also, on the note of, being in an age of distraction and being on our phones and too much and stuff like that, some people I've heard have found e-readers helpful because it's almost like you're tricking your brain because you're still looking at a screen. But yeah,
that's interesting.
It might be worth checking out.
As long as your notifications are turned off.
Yeah. Do you have one book that would come to mind for a recommendation for someone who wants to read some solid Christian books and really hasn't before? Maybe something kind of shorter. I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah. Okay. Who I think is really readable is Tim Keller. He's very intelligent, so you get a lot of meat out of reading him. He's not fluff. But he's very digestible in the way that he communicates deep truths. And so one of my favorites by him is, it was called King's Cross in its original publishing. And then they changed it, and I can't remember what they changed it to. But it's essentially selections through the book of Mark. That one's just really good. Prodigal God is another really good one. That's his take on Luke 15. I mentioned Tale of Two Sons by John MacArthur, but his Prodigal God is really, really well done. And I'm currently reading, Rediscovering Jonah as we're preaching through Jonah in our sermon series. And it's not written as a commentary.
That's Tim Keller, too.
Yeah, Tim Keller as well. Yeah, so I think he's just one of those guys that writes in a way in which you can understand him, but you also recognize that he's telling you really profound things. And I think that's a good balance because we don't want to just read fluff. I think we've all been there. We're reading books that are just like, telling you like, hey, do this thing and everything will be different. You're kind of like, yeah, I don't know if I really buy that. Or, you're just saying cheap things, and that's just easy to do because you can, just dazzle it up with a bunch of adjectives and stuff like that. And say basically one sentence in 20 pages. Yeah. and that's a waste of time in my opinion. So yeah, I like TK. I like Tim Keller. How about you? Do you have a guy that or something that resonates with you?
What comes to my mind is Jerry Bridges.
Oh yeah.
Pursuit of Holiness is an excellent book, and it's not much more than, it might be like 120 pages. So his books aren't that long. They look a little, at least the newer editions, they look thicker than they actually are because they have discussion questions at the end of all of them. But Pursuit of Holiness is a really good book, and I feel like he's pretty easy to read. He comes from the Navigators that were popular a few decades ago.
Yeah. No, that's a good. Yeah, he comes from good circles. He's a good read for sure. Yeah, good.
And ask us for recommendations. If you've listened this far and you're interested in this subject, you could come up to either of us at church, and there are a few things we would enjoy to talk about more than books and make suggestions and stuff. So
definitely.
Well, next week we should have Pastor Zach back in studio with us, and Lord willing, we will be doing another episode devoted to questions submitted to us from our North Park Church members. And as always, there'll be a link in the show notes for the Google form where you can submit your questions for the podcast, and we would love to hear from you. So please keep the questions coming. But thanks for tuning in, and we hope you have a great week. Kept it under an hour.
I am impressed that we did that. Yes, indeed.